What's going on, Packers Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Packers Latest. I am your host, Taylor Bretl, keeping you up to date on the latest news on the Green and Gold Green Bay Packers. A happy Tuesday to all of you watching out there. Whether you're tuned in on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, wherever you tune in to Packers Latest, I've appreciated all your support. We have another fun episode ahead of us today. It's going to focus in on defensive lineman Dexter Lawrence from the New York Giants, who did just recently request a trade, actually yesterday, and kind of looking into could the Green Bay Packers go after a big name like Lawrence. So the initial release here was per Adam Schefter on X, saying ESPN sources, Giants all-pro defensive tackle Dexter Lawrence has requested a trade and he will not be participating in the team's offseason workout program that opens Tuesday. Lawrence and the Giants have been through 2 off seasons attempting to negotiate a contract, reflecting his value to the Giants over the last 3 years, but there has not been any progress per sources. So not really good news if you're Giants fans there. One of your star defensive linemen not really happy with the organization and how he's valued. There's also one more thing on this. This is per Easton Butler on X, kind of honing in on what teams might actually be in on Lawrence. He put, several teams have called the Giants about star defensive tackle Dexter Lawrence, with some including the Packers, Bears, Jaguars, and Bills. Per source, in quotes, it says, a Quinnen Williams type trade to start a conversation, end quote. It also says, if traded, Lawrence will be moved prior to the draft, but isn't expected to be moved regardless of the public trade request. So that is a big thing of this episode. It seems like if he's moved, it would be before the draft, just to reiterate what Easton Butler said, but it does seem unlikely. We always like to dive in to learn about some of these guys, because if the Packers were to make a move and get something on Lawrence, I want you guys to be educated on what he could bring to the Packers right away if that news were to break. So let's kind of take a look at Lawrence's recent stats, which unfortunately he did have a down year in 2025, but maybe there's some pros with that for the Packers' sake. So Lawrence, to look at him as well, defensive lineman, stands at 6'4" and 340 pounds. We're going to look at his last 4 seasons, because he was a Pro Bowler in 2022, 2023, and 2024, but this recent season in 2025, he was not. A huge down year from him. So we're going to backtrack it all the way to 2022. In that season, he had 68 tackles and 7.5 sacks. 7 of those tackles were for loss. In 2023, he had 53 tackles with 4.5 sacks and 7 tackles for loss once more. In 2024, 44 tackles, 9 sacks, and 8 tackles for loss. So if you notice that trend there, the tackles get less and less by the year, but the sack numbers were at 7.5, then dipped to 4, and then bumped up to 9. And that was only in 12 games, to actually note. In 22 and 23, he played 16 games. In that 2024 season, he got those 9 sacks with just 12 games played. So definitely his strongest season of his career, at least in my personal opinion. 44 tackles, 8 for loss, and 9 sacks in 12 games is some pretty strong numbers. But then you go to 2025, you go to this most recent season with the New York Giants, and he played all 17 games, but his numbers kind of feel like he only played about half that amount. He only had 31 tackles, only 4 of them were for loss, and only a half a sack. Like, I had to double check that the source I originally looked for his stats on was correct. I cross-referenced, and yeah, that unfortunately is the truth with Lawrence. Just a half a sack and only 31 tackles, only 4 for a loss in a 2025 season where he played 17 games. So is that a concern for the Green Bay Packers? Maybe, because do you really want to go after a guy that did have a down year? But we see this a lot with some people. The Packers let Rashawn Gary go. Well, obviously, one of the reasons was because of the amount of money he costed, but he did have that down year in 2025 that led the Packers to dump him, and maybe the Cowboys saying, hey, we'll take Gary. We think he's better than you are valuing him. We'll give you, a 4th-round pick for him, which happy the Packers got something out of it, because we thought the Packers were just going to dump him overall. But it is just interesting to view it that way. I really do think you have to look at Dexter Lawrence, all pro level guy, a Pro Bowler in 22, 23, 24, like I mentioned, and especially in that 2024 season, only 12 games and 9 sacks and 44 tackles. I mean, just really impressive. Just really odd how much he dipped off in that 2025 season. You got to be wary. If you get injured, you come back from it. Is that a big reason why? Lots of concerns there, but that's going to swing it over to what will his expected trade value be? Because, again, he's not a free agent. The Packers would have to trade for him. And if you've watched the past couple of episodes and we look at trades with the Green Bay Packers, it's not really a recipe for success, because the big question is, do the Packers even have the assets to trade? But because of this down year in 2025, that's why I said, maybe there could be a pro within a con. It does make his value cheaper, at least in my opinion. It's got to be cheaper. And that's kind of frustrating for the Giants, because You read the earlier release there saying how they have kind of been going back and forth, what Adam Schefter touched on, over the last 3 years. And over those last 3 years, you had the All-Pro, Pro Bowl lever Dexter Lawrence for 3 straight seasons. Now this recent one, he dipped down, so his value should be less than what it could have been even after just a 2024 season where he played those 12 games. So I wrote here, because of a down year in 2025, it could lower his price, which could be a pro for the Packers. But even with that, could the Packers still afford him? You go back to that post per Easton Butler, where he said it's a Quinnen Williams type trade to start a conversation. That made me want to dive into the Quinnen Williams trade between the Jets and the Cowboys, and this is what it resulted in being. For the Cowboys to receive Williams, a defensive tackle, they had to give up a second-round pick, which ended up being the 44th overall pick. They had to give their 2027 first-round pick and Mozzie Smith, who's also a defensive tackle. Not a huge name. It was really the picks that were the highlight of this trade package. So to get Quinnen Williams, which they view Dexter Lawrence similarly to, they had to give up a first-round pick in 27 and their second-round pick in 26. Can the Packers even do that? I mean, is that even achievable, which I'm going to touch on in the next point? I'm not so sure, but could the Packers really even afford it? I want you guys to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Should the Packers even go for something like this? Because it's also to note the type of picks that the Packers have when you really look at it, because with the Micah Parsons trade, you had to give up a lot. So let's just actually swing it into that last point, because I feel like we're transitioning here perfectly. Does Green Bay have a shot at landing Lawrence? Again, once more, looking at this trade between between the Jets and the Cowboys for Williams, the Jets got that second round pick, which is the 44th overall pick, a first round pick in 2027, and then Mozzie Smith. Quinnen Williams, don't get me wrong, I think he is a little bit younger, so maybe that makes the value a little bit higher, and he wasn't on a super low season in 2025 like Lawrence was, so maybe you can factor those in, but if those are the two guys that are getting compared, I'm looking at a trade in that similar value. So in my couple of notes I have here, I honestly wrote the word no to is it achievable, but I honestly, I'll hope I'm wrong. Maybe the Packers could go after him, and I'm wrong, and I'll eat my words, but I don't know if it's achievable, because the Packers do they even have the picks for it? They don't have a first rounder this year. They don't have a first rounder next year, again, because of the Micah Parsons trade, which I'm totally glad of not having first round picks, because you have Micah Parsons. That's not the point that I'm trying to go on, but they don't have a first round pick this year. They don't have a first round pick next year. The Giants are probably going to need to get a first round pick, and are they going to really want one in 2028? Probably not, unless other teams cannot give as attractive of an offer. And then you also got to ask, do the Packers want to pay the money? Because again, it's a trade, right? It's a trade. The Packers have to pick up his contract. I'm trying to remember what it is off the top of my head. I think it's like a 4-year, $85 million. I think he's projected to get around $20 million this upcoming season, something along those lines. So you talk about the trade in its own. Do the Packers even have the picks for that? And then when you do the trade, do the Packers even have the money to keep Lawrence as well? Feel free to leave in the comments down below if you think the Packers do or if you think the Packers don't, because in my opinion, I don't think it's too achievable. And then especially with a lot of teams interested in him, a lot of teams want to be in on Lawrence, I think there's going to be a lot of more attractive offers in the Packers. Again, it says per, Easton Butler and Adam Schefter, as I touched on, it seems like the Packers are interested, like they've made a slight push to try to get Lawrence, or at least to try to talk to him. I don't know if the interest is really there, especially if something like this needs to get done before the draft, which is in just, 2 weeks. It might have to be a little bit rushed, and you really don't want to, put yourself in a bad position, wanting a name, rushing a trade, and maybe really ruining your future. So again, feel free to leave in the comments below. Do you want the Packers to try to get Dexter Lawrence? My personal opinion, just probably no, just because of how thin the picks are. And the Packers' money issues, they resolved a lot of it in this offseason. Do they want to kind of put themselves right back there and pick up a contract of a rather expensive defensive lineman, but totally worth the money because he was all-pro, Pro Bowl level type, even though that 2025 season was a down year? I think that's another interesting thing as well. Would you give up like a first-round pick or two for a guy that just is coming off a career-low year and have to pay him that much? That's kind of how I view it. So don't really want the Packers to go for him, but I think he would be great on this Packers defensive line. I think it would make them one of the best defensive lines in the league, so don't get me wrong on that end. But I just don't think that Dexter Lawrence might be the recipe for what the Packers need. They might have to attack elsewhere. They could still draft a defensive tackle as well. Again, a second, if they do it with their first pick in the draft, a second-round pick defensive tackle will probably not be the levels of Dexter Lawrence, at least right out of the gate, but it would be a way cheaper option and a way safer option because you already have that pick pick, and you know that it's upcoming at 52nd overall. But that's all I got for today's episode of Packers Latest. Again, feel free to leave in the comments below. Do you want the Packers to try to get a big name like Dexter Lawrence, or do you want them to just not worry about anyone else and focus on the draft? I appreciate you tuning in to another episode as always, and go Pack Go.